You've probably heard about the NATO invasion of Libya in 2011 and the brutal killing of Muammar Gaddafi. The official story was that it was a humanitarian intervention to protect civilians. But what if that was just a cover-up? What if there was a darker truth behind the real reasons for going to war? Leaked emails from Hillary Clinton, Secretary of State at the time, might blow the lid off the whole thing. These emails reveal a shocking secret agenda that had nothing to do with humanitarianism. In this explosive video, you'll uncover the disturbing evidence that NATO's war on Libya was actually about money, power, and oil. You'll see how Gaddafi's plan to create a pan-African currency threatened to upend the global financial system. And you'll learn why Western powers felt they had to take him out, no matter the cost. Brace yourself for a mind-blowing expose that will shatter everything you thought you knew about the Libya intervention. The truth is uglier than you could imagine. Before NATO's bombs rained down, Libya under Muammar Gaddafi was a prosperous nation. The Libyan people enjoyed free education, free healthcare, and a right to housing. It was a far cry from one of the poorest countries in Africa that Libya once was. Gaddafi's crowning achievement was the Great Man-Made River Project, one of the world's largest irrigation systems. This massive infrastructure project brought water from the desert to the cities and coastal regions. It turned vast stretches of arid land into fertile ground for agriculture.
One of the most ambitious irrigation schemes in the world. It's called the Great Man-Made River, and it flows beneath these sands. It is colossal in scale. 500,000 concrete pipes have been made and laid down over the past 2.5 decades. 6,000 kilometers of pipeline. Engineers digging deep into the bowels of the earth to tap into ancient aquifers. Libyans call it the eighth wonder of the world.
But Gaddafi didn't stop there. He established a state-owned bank that provided interest-free loans for development projects. No more crushing debt from the IMF or World Bank. Libya was charting its course, free from the shackles of Western financial institutions. Gaddafi had big dreams for the rest of Africa too. He wanted to spread Libya's economic model across the continent. No more reliance on former colonial powers. Africa could finally be truly independent and self-sufficient. This bold vision of African unity and prosperity terrified the West. How dare a small nation like Libya defy the global financial system they controlled? Gaddafi's unorthodox policies made him a threat that needed to be eliminated. Gaddafi wasn't just dreaming of economic independence for Libya. His vision extended to the entire African continent. The centerpiece of this bold plan was the creation of a pan-African currency called the Libyan Golden Dinar. This new currency would be backed by Libya's vast reserves of gold and silver. In an eye-opening email from April 2, 2011, Hillary Clinton's confidant, Sidney Blumenthal, revealed the shocking details. Gaddafi's government held a staggering 143 tons of gold and a similar amount of silver. Worth over $7 billion, this precious metal stockpile was intended to establish the Pan-African dinar. If successful, this move would have dealt a devastating blow to the global financial system, dominated by the US dollar and European currencies like the French African franc. For decades, African nations had been stuck using these colonial-era currencies, perpetually indebted and exploited by their former imperial masters. But the Libyan dinar threatened to upend everything. It offered Africa a path to true economic sovereignty. No more playing by the rules of the Western banking cartels. This symbolic break from monetary colonialism was simply unacceptable to the powers that be. The leaked emails also exposed the pivotal role played by France in the decision to overthrow Gaddafi. According to intelligence sources cited in the emails, French spies were the first to uncover Gaddafi's currency plan. This discovery sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Paris. For French President Nicolas Sarkozy, Gaddafi's vision struck at the heart of France's interests in Africa. The emails outline 5 key factors that motivated Sarkozy to lead the charge for military intervention in Libya: a desire to gain a greater share of Libya's oil production for French companies, increasing French political influence and dominance in North Africa, bolstering Sarkozy's domestic political standing in France, providing an opportunity for the French military to flex its muscles on the world stage. Crucially, addressing concerns that Gaddafi's Pan-African currency threatened to supplant French monetary control over its former African colonies. For centuries, France had exploited its African territories through the French African franc. Gaddafi's plan jeopardized this crucial economic stranglehold. It's no wonder Sarkozy felt compelled to act decisively to crush this upstart African maverick. To fully grasp the earth-shattering implications of Gaddafi's Pan-African currency plan, we need to understand the foundations of the global financial system itself. This system is built on a complex web of debt, exploitation, and monetary manipulation by a cabal of private banks and financial institutions. It all stems from the concept of fractional reserve banking. In simple terms, this means that banks can essentially create money out of thin air through the lending process. For every dollar deposited, they can lend out many times more, keeping only a small fraction as reserves. After World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement further centralized this bank-created monetary system on a global scale. It established institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank to oversee and enforce the rules of this rigged game. But the linchpin holding it all together is the petrodollar system. Since the 1970s, global oil trade has been denominated exclusively in US dollars. This artificial demand for dollars allows the US to perpetually accumulate debt while exporting its inflation to the rest of the world. Any nation daring to challenge this financial hegemony faces swift and brutal consequences. When Iraq's Saddam Hussein began selling oil in euros in 2000, it was all the pretext the US needed to unleash its shock and awe military campaign just 3 years later. Gaddafi's plan to freely trade Libyan oil in a new Pan-African currency posed an existential threat to the petrodollar system and its domination by the US dollar. It's no wonder the financial elite felt so threatened by this African upstart. Gaddafi wasn't the first leader to challenge the petrodollar system and face severe consequences. Cast your mind back to 2000, when Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein made a bold move that would seal his fate. Hussein announced that Iraq would no longer accept US dollars for oil payments, instead demanding payment in euros. This direct threat to the global dominance of the dollar set off alarm bells in Washington. How dare a defiant nation like Iraq undermine the very currency that underpinned American economic might? Within 3 years, the US had cooked up dubious claims about weapons of mass destruction and launched its catastrophic invasion of Iraq in 2003. Saddam's real crime, it seems, was his attempt to free Iraq from the shackles of the petrodollar system. His execution at the hands of the new Iraqi government was a grim warning to any other nations thinking of bucking the status quo. Gaddafi, too, understood the power of the petrodollar and its role in perpetuating Western economic imperialism. In the years leading up to the NATO intervention, he had begun making moves to distance Libya from this rigged system. Libyan oil was increasingly being sold in currencies other than the dollar, chipping away at the currency's artificially inflated power. But Gaddafi's most audacious plan was the creation of the Pan-African Golden Dinar. If this currency had taken root across the resource-rich African continent, it could have sparked an unprecedented shift in global financial dynamics. Whole nations would be liberated from their bondage to the US dollar and the rapacious Western banking machines that controlled it. This wasn't just about Libya, it was a direct challenge to the entire existing global financial order that had kept Africa impoverished and subservient for centuries. No wonder the financial elite viewed Gaddafi as such a grave threat to their dominance. With the legions of NATO warplanes raining down devastation, it quickly became clear that the stated humanitarian objectives were a mere fig leaf. The relentless bombing campaign aimed at the very infrastructure that sustained ordinary Libyan civilians, with chilling disregard for human life. One of the main targets was the Great Man-Made River Project, Gaddafi's crowning achievement that had brought a water lifeline to the cities and fertile regions of Libya. NATO bombs directly struck the pipeline itself, as well as the factories that produced the pipes needed for repairs and maintenance. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded attempt to cripple this vital irrigation system that over 2/3 of the population depended on for water supplies and agriculture. Destroying the very means of survival for millions of innocent people could hardly be labeled a humanitarian intervention. But the wanton destruction didn't stop there. Schools, hospitals, and other civilian facilities all came under repeated assault from the NATO bombardment. Even the humble residential homes of ordinary Libyans weren't spared from the indiscriminate rain of high explosives. In a bitter twist of irony, it was the NATO forces themselves who were responsible for many of the civilian casualties they claimed to be preventing. Hospitals overflowing with wounded civilians stood as grim testament to the reality on the ground. As the Libyan writer Maximilian Forte observed, it was NATO's intervention that arguably tilted the scales in favor of a new breed of human rights violators who would make Kadafi seem tame. So much for protecting human rights and freedoms. What the leaked emails revealed was that this massive civilian suffering wasn't just an unfortunate byproduct of the war. It was an intentional tactic to punish the Libyan people for the unforgivable crime of nurturing dreams of independence and self-determination under Gaddafi's leadership. Humanitarianism had nothing to do with it. As the full extent of NATO's wanton destruction in Libya became clear, one expert voice cut through the fog of war with a chilling assessment. Professor Maximilian Forte, in his meticulously researched book, Slouching Towards Ceuta, laid bare the intervention's true objective: to disrupt an emerging pattern of independence and a network of collaboration within Africa that would facilitate increased African self-reliance. In other words, Gaddafi's grand vision of a united, self-sufficient Africa posed an existential threat not just to the global financial order, but to the very ability of Western powers to continue exploiting the continent's vast natural resources and human capital. This revelation helps explain one of the most puzzling aspects of the Libyan conflict: the mysterious emergence of a rebel central bank just weeks after the fighting began. How could a ragtag group of insurgents so rapidly establish such a complex financial institution amidst the chaos of war? The answer, it seems, lies in the shadowy hand of foreign interests and their determination to preemptively disrupt any move toward true African economic sovereignty. A rebel central bank could swiftly reintegrate a post-Gaddafi Libya back into the very global financial system that the maverick leader had sought to escape. This wasn't just about Libya, however. The leaked emails expose how Gaddafi's Pan-African ambitions had sent shockwaves through the corridors of power in Paris, Washington, and other Western capitals. His dreams of a gold-backed African currency threatened to loosen the stranglehold that European powers like France had exerted over their former colonial territories for decades. Lurking behind the talk of human rights and democracy was an age-old story of imperial conquest and subjugation through economic domination. Africa's vast mineral wealth, bountiful oil reserves, and cheap labor represented a treasure trove ripe for continued plunder by the West. Any move toward genuine independence and self-determination had to be nipped in the bud, no matter the human cost. In the wake of NATO's military onslaught and the grisly lynching of Gaddafi himself, Libya was plunged into chaos from which it has yet to fully emerge. The nation fractured along tribal and regional lines, descending into a protracted and bloody civil war between various militias and factions vying for power. Far from the promised democracy and freedom, ordinary Libyans found themselves trapped in a nightmarish cyclone of violence, lawlessness, and human rights abuses on a staggering scale. Reliable reports from groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch documented widespread torture, arbitrary detentions, kidnappings, and extrajudicial killings becoming the new normal. In a bitter irony, it was the very NATO-backed rebel forces that were often responsible for some of the worst atrocities, the same forces sold to the world as liberators and champions of human rights. As a grim reminder of this reality, thousands of detainees, including children, languished in squalid prisons without access to proper judicial review. All of this unfolded against a backdrop of economic devastation and institutional collapse. The country's vast oil wealth and economic potential lay in ruins, coming to resemble more of a failed state than the prosperous, self-reliant nation Gaddafi had fought to build. Yet in the face of such catastrophic human suffering, the very leaders who had green-lighted the military intervention engaged in a nauseating victory dance. Hillary Clinton's boastful, "We came, we saw, he died" statement, delivered with a callous cackle, encapsulated the utter disregard for Libyan lives on display. Her premature victory lap seemed ripped straight from the pages of imperial hubris. It echoed the misguided pronouncements of past Western leaders convinced of their civilizing burden to uplift the so-called barbarians. Except this time, it was NATO firepower, not the white man's burden, that had systematically demolished a once prosperous nation. Amidst the fog of war and propaganda, the leaked Hillary Clinton emails stand as a damning smoking gun, exposing the true motives behind NATO's intervention in Libya. These candid communications shed harsh light on the real forces driving the decision to unleash hell on Gaddafi's regime. In email after email, there is barely a whisper of humanitarian concern or outrage over alleged atrocities. Instead, discussions revolve coldly around money, oil, and raw geopolitical self-interest. Toppling Gaddafi is framed as a means to an end, entrenching Western financial and resource domination over the entire African continent. It's a brutal revelation that upends the lofty rhetoric used to sell the Libyan war to the public. Grand talk of freedom, democracy, and human rights was merely a fig leaf, barely concealing the hard-nosed pursuit of power and profit. Foreign policy decisions of this magnitude were made not through moral conviction, but brutal calculations of how to preserve the global financial status quo. The lessons of Libya should serve as a chilling wake-up call to any nation daring to challenge the existing world order. The obliteration of Gaddafi's regime was a message written in blood. Any serious threat to Western economic domination would be met with overwhelming military force. For the people of nations like Iran, Venezuela, or any other resource-rich country dreaming of economic independence, the implications are grave. Attempts to forge new financial systems or abandon the petrodollar could be construed as grounds for violent intervention under the pretext of humanitarianism, and the threat extends beyond just alternative currencies. Any ideology or model that challenges Western-style capitalism and debt-based financing could find itself in the crosshairs. The restructuring of global trade routes and control over vital resources. No economic chessboard is too big or too small when the empire's interests are threatened. Worryingly, the leaked emails reveal just how entrenched and systemic this mindset is within the foreign policy establishment. An entire cast of influencers, from career bureaucrats to brazen corporate lobbyists, stands ready to persuade, cajole, and apply pressure to defend their vested interests worldwide. The ugly truth laid bare in the Clinton emails should disturb anyone who values peace, self-determination, and human life over the naked pursuit of money and power. Libya's destruction was not a humanitarian intervention, but a mercenary campaign fueled by oil, gold, and the desperate need to preserve U.S. financial hegemony. Moving forward, we must scrutinize official narratives peddled by the political elite and mass media with clear eyes. Hidden motives often underpin even the most well-packaged military actions. Critical thinking is our greatest weapon against being misled into supporting unjustified conflicts. What other examples can you think of where humanitarian claims masked ulterior geopolitical motives? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Smash that like button and subscribe for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.